Welcome to the Better Road Podcast, where we pave the way to better living and discover the roads less traveled. Connor, what's up, brother?
How we doing, Stefan?
We're good. Where are you coming from?
Right now, I'm coming from a fantasy football draft in northern New Jersey, but I'm based out of the Philadelphia suburbs these days. So,
Okay. And you're here for the weekend, or?
yeah, just here for the weekend. Got to head back. Have work this week, so just a quick stop up to drop by and talk some talk.
Awesome, man. I appreciate you being here. I really do.
It's great to be here.
Thank you, family. Everybody, I'm introducing my good friend Connor. I met Connor in college. He was in my fraternity, and I just got to start off by saying AI is becoming very prevalent nowadays. Right here we have a human AI. His nickname during college was actually Robo, and that's because the amount of information, effort, work ethic that Connor puts in on a daily basis is substantial. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with him, and I just want to start off with what's going on right now. What's keeping you busy?
So what's keeping me busy is I just got my license as an associate professional counselor in Pennsylvania a couple months ago. So it's
Congrats.
Thank you. Pennsylvania has like a tiered licensure system. They actually just passed it. So it used to just be when you graduate from your graduate degree and you're pursuing your professional counselor license, you have like a 2-year gap, and then you're eligible to, you have to meet certain requirements, but then you're eligible to apply for your full licensure. They just passed the tiered licensure system, which New Jersey and many other states have. I'm not sure if New York has it. They probably do. But basically now I have this associate license, and then next year, this time, I'll be eligible for sort of the full license, which just means, I can sort of sign off on all my own cases. I could start my own practice. I can sort of have a lot more flexibility with negotiating my own contracts with insurance companies and that kind of thing.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So right now with your associate, you're under someone else's license.
Yes.
So you could practice.
Right. So I work at a private practice in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And right now I have a supervisor who supervises my cases. So what supervision means for therapists is basically twice a week I meet with more experienced therapists who have full licenses, and we go through like my cases, right? So what does that mean? It means like we show up, we talk about some of the more advanced cases that I have, kind of what kind of things I'm struggling with personally as a therapist, what kind of things I need more direct clinical advice on, right? What direction should I go here? This is a situation that I hadn't had before this past week, and this is what I did. How do you think I handled that? Right. So it's really just kind of, making sure, and with sort of more complicated cases where, safety might be a priority, or you're assessing the sort of the appropriateness of a particular person for the outpatient setting. Right. Those are really good things to have someone to supervise you for when you're just getting started and you're trying to navigate a lot of sort of nuances and complexities and things you haven't seen before yet. So
awesome. So what type of clients are you working with? Is it the same as before?
Right. Yeah. So I need to be careful, obviously, because I have sort of confidentiality, so I can't really talk too much publicly, but I can speak in really broad terms, right? So I work with adults and kids across the spectrum. I mean, I've worked with kids as young as 4 in like play therapy, all the way up to people in their 70s, right? So I've worked with people kind of all across the age spectrum. I like working with different populations. It adds sort of, in like age groups, it adds like variability. You really get like this sort of interesting perspective on sort of life and the lifespan when, I'm sitting here as my 27-year-old self, and then like, I'm helping someone who's a couple decades older, and then I'm helping someone who's like, navigating sort of high school or college or something like that. So I'm sort of constantly in the different sort of nuances and struggles of like different parts of people's lives. And that's like a really cool perspective to just have as a person, and like kind of evaluating and taking stock and like seeing big picture like every day.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
Yeah. It's a really different lens. So
Awesome. So when I had met you, you were on a business track
Yep.
with college.
Yep.
And you seemed to fall out of place or weren't in love with it, at least.
Sure.
What made you decide to go with the
Right.
psychology track?
Right. So for me, it was kind of a perfect storm of things. It's not that I wasn't doing sort of well in the business school at UM, like I was.
Yeah.
But it was, I was always interested in psychology, but my high school did not have any psychology classes. So I had, read some Malcolm Gladwell, which was, soft sociology, like pop psychology, interwoven, like digestible for a high school kid, right? So I read a few of his books. I really liked his stuff at that point in time, like Outliers,
Yeah.
I saw you had Talking to Strangers. That was a good one, but that came out later. But like Blink, all these ones that I was like, I was definitely interested. But I didn't have like the confidence as 18-year-old in like having just kind of some cursory interest in that to like dive all the way in. And like, my family has a business background. So I was like, it was the safe thing to go in and be like, okay, like, my older brother, my dad are involved in business. That's been their careers. Let me just go that path. And then sort of what happened was like halfway through, I was like, let's go for it. There was a perfect storm of things that were happening in my personal life. And just like I tried some internships and stuff and I wasn't loving it. I didn't find myself like putting in the extra effort. Like, I haven't been called Robo in a while. So that was a fun introduction for me.
Okay.
But yeah, I really enjoyed that. But it was,
Thank you.
it was, it brought me back to kind of like at that time, right? So I was, I'm someone who's used to like, choosing things that bring out my best.
Right.
So when I was in these like internship environments or like, I just felt like it wasn't bringing out my best and like I wasn't getting lost in it. I wasn't like I wasn't looking for more. And so I think that was like a signpost for me. And then, I just kind of came back and changed to psychology after sophomore year in college. And luckily I had some like AP credits. I started working in a research lab at UM for credit. So I was able to catch up that way, which was really nice. So I still graduated on time, despite like changing schools and my prerequisites all changed. So I had to do quite a bit of things to get back on track, but it all worked out. And I got to have a really cool experience working at the Child and Adolescent Mood and Anxiety Treatment Program at UM, which is actually like, completely by accident since, I wasn't going to UM for psychology, but they had this really renowned lab down there for pediatric anxiety and depression. So I got to learn a lot there. Dr. Jill Ehrenreich-May, who runs that lab, she is an absolute baller in the psychology space and literature, and she was such a great mentor to have in those early days. So shout out
Did
her.
you have a goal going in to when you switched tracks to psychology? Were you like, I want to do it for this reason?
Yeah, I think in general, I was always, the plan was always to sort of do clinical work. So when I say clinical work, some kind of therapy, some kind of intervening with people and behavior, right? The question more so was, what track do I take to get there? So there's a lot of different tracks that you can do with psychology and clinical work, right? So the route that I went is I got a master's in science in clinical mental health counseling, right? So you could do that. You could get a master's in social work. You could get what's called a PsyD, which is a psychological doctorate, which are becoming more and more popular. They make a lot of money for universities. I'll just say that.
Classic.
They take like like a lot of colleges who have these programs will take like 100 students per class or 75 students per class. They're charging them $60,000 tuition for 5 years, no scholarships.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
do you get paid more going through that track?
Yes, you get paid more going through that track, but like, so I did the cost benefit for me. I would have had to work as a full-time therapist for like 25 to 30 years to pay back the difference in the education,
and the education costs.
And the education cost between the two, what I spent on getting my master's and going through, and like the difference of what I'm going to get paid like as a therapist with a master's versus a therapist with a PsyD.
Right.
Now, there's a caveat to that, right? Which is that's if you're going based on sort of insurance reimbursement rates. There's a lot going on in the mental health space that we can talk about because it's changed so much in the last 5 years, even from when we graduated undergrad, then when I was working went back to grad school because of the COVID thing. So much transformed that changed the space. But that's going based off insurance reimbursement rates, right? And so, because that's one of the ways to look at an objective valuation of how the market is valuating my work versus a PsyD's work, right? So you look at that, but there's also other tracks, right? Clinical psychology PhDs. Now, clinical psychology PhDs are more selective than medical school or law school. They're like probably one of the most difficult graduate degrees to get accepted into, and the reason for that is because you're basically applying directly to a mentor, right? So if I wanted to study clinical psychology at University of Miami, right, I would be like applying to the program, but I'm really applying to like Dr. Erin Reich May, who runs the program there, right? So what I'm really doing, and then my resume needs to like match up with her specific research interest and research lab, right? So on paper, I could be the most qualified candidate, right, for that program. But if my research experience does not match what the research that the lab actually does, then number 5 might get picked on the list for me, right? And they don't even take students every year. So maybe like this year, a program won't even accept any students, and then the next year it's like they're accepting 5, right? And it gets like hundreds of applications. So it's a really competitive process. I didn't love research enough to do it, because that's basically what it is, right? Like you're doing classes, you're doing research, you have to do a dissertation, right? Dissertation is an original research idea, sort of from soup to nuts, right? From beginning to end, you're really putting a lot of work in. And if at best you're doing that in 5-6 years, if you're going off, right?
I'm sure the tuition for that's also expensive.
No, so that on that side, it's very competitive, but you can usually find when you're doing that, because it's so exclusive and you're doing research for the university, right? A lot of times those people will be basically like employee students, right? So
interesting,
right? So those people are usually like aren't paying tuition, or at least getting paid. Right. And it's not the same as a society. Usually they get like funding or sponsorship, right, to do that of some kind. So the clinical psych and PsyDs, I would say the clinical psych is the sort of most competitive, on the whole, most qualified, right, all around, right, have done the most boots on the ground work to earn their title, and to that being said, I've met people who have all sorts of degrees who aren't very.
I'm sure.
It's like anything in life. Some people are.
Can
better.
You reiterate what was your degree?
So I have a master's in science in clinical mental health counseling.
Okay.
Yep. So I'm a counselor, right? So we use therapist oftentimes because I work in a private practice. That's what people refer to when they're coming to see me. I use therapy and counseling interchangeably. Obviously, there's some differences there in how the fields came about. So counseling, my field and my degree that I got, sort of spawned out of more vocational and career counseling. So that's kind of the origins of the field that I work in. So we get like a slight emphasis on that in our program, but overall, some of the other differences that at least counseling proclaims, right, as a field, is we operate from a developmental perspective, right, and from a wellness perspective. What does that mean? It just means we see everything in the context of this question, right? What is actually abnormal? So is someone who's, having trouble grieving their spouse of 20 years and they haven't gotten over it 2 years and they're still depressed? Like, is there something wrong with that? You know what I mean? So I think sometimes we pathologize things, right? We turn things into issues, right? When we take the medical model, right? You're having symptoms of depression, so therefore you're depressed. So therefore we need to remedy that with a treatment, right? Versus counseling likes to see itself as this thing, coming alongside someone in their journey. I think that's a better way of thinking about it, right? So in the context of how your life is unfolding, in the context of taking all the variables in your life into play, right? What it is the reaction that you're having normal? Most of the times it is. So instead of saying, oh my gosh, you have anxiety, it's like, you have a lot going on in your life right now. Makes sense why you're a little wound up. Of course, that comes with all of the clinical background that we have in helping people understand what anxiety is, where it comes from, what kind of thoughts and beliefs they're bringing with them, either from the past or just unexamined thoughts that are slipping in there that are sort of causing jam ups that are producing anxiety, right? So that's our job. But in general, I think that's, the difference between the wellness model and the medical model is a lot of trying to think about, we're trying to help people flourish and achieve their goals and not sort of view them as diagnoses, right?
Right. I like that.
As people instead of as their diagnoses.
Right.
Yeah.
I really like that. And thank you for sharing. I feel like that's the perfect fit for you.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned like, what's the question? The question is like, what is abnormal and what's normal? That's very philosophical.
Sure.
To some degree. I saw you started your own podcast, right?
That's right. We shout out Vince.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
So my buddy Vince and I, we went through our graduate program together. He was kind of itching to start one and was like, "Do you want to do it together? Like, I think we could have a really great conversations." And I did cave. I was a little scared of being on the internet. I was a little scared because
You've been off the internet since college.
Yes. For anyone who doesn't know, I've been the social media list warrior, the last stronghold of
super respectable, by the way. I definitely envy you to some degree.
Well, I'm back on X, so throw me a follow on X at Connor J Mears. But that's dipping my toe back in the water a little bit. But I took a long break that was necessary, and we can go into the whole technology thing. But the podcast is called Connecting in Commotion.
Right.
So the idea is we're trying to kind of create sort of a blend, a home, a space for people who want to stand on principle in shades of gray. That was one thing that popped into my head when we were recording our first episode on Friday night. And sort of just what that means is like how technology in the 21st century has sort of slowly started pulling apart our society and people into silos, and everyone sort of disagreeing. Wanted to have a space of approaching issues and trying to come to the middle and focus on sort of the yes and in life, right? In life, there's no simple answers, right? Everything has a trade-off. Everything comes at a cost. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, and that's a lot of what I do as a therapist is pros and cons, helping people weigh out decisions in their life and understand that and own those decisions, whether they're implicit decisions or explicit decisions, whether they're choosing not to do something or they're choosing to do something. It's like that, a lot of times there's this freezing anxiety that we have when we make big decisions in our life. And part of it is because we want to have our cake and eat it too. Mm-hmm. But part of it is like there's a transactional nature that is woven into the fabric of reality. Like you can't take something without giving something up. It's everywhere. It's the opportunity cost, right?
Right.
In order to come here and record this podcast, I can't do anything else with this time.
Right.
I'm here with you.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So, in general, I think that the podcast is to kind of just explore things about psychology, about mental health, about society, maybe even about business. Vince, my buddy and co-host, he's a very business-minded individual too. One thing that I think is really good is that we're very similar, like in our interests, and we have some very different perspectives on the same things. Mm-hmm. So it works in the sense that we both have a lot of respect for each other, but I think we're gonna have some verbal jousting, if you will, in a positive way, but like trying to always do that yes and, right? Trying to find the shades of gray. Like, I see your point, right? And we have to account for this, right? Right, and it's not saying
like Skip Bayless, Stephen A. action almost.
Yeah. I'm not discounting your point, and I think we just need to add this to the picture. It might even just be like a little dot up here in the corner that seems irrelevant, but it's still in the picture. Yeah. Right? And so trying to like paint these canvases of these issues and broaden them out instead of, just kind of the little sort of sound bites that we get and things about sort of psychology, mental health space that people don't see. One thing that, I was referencing just a little bit ago is how much sort of the mental health field has changed over the last 5 years with like the dawn of telehealth. Like it's changed.
Yeah, I saw you post that on X. It's really interesting.
It's changed a lot.
Yeah. Basically, the premise is that like speaking to somebody over the camera doesn't have the same effect and emotional connection as it does when you're with the person in person. Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. And so they this was a scanning study done at Yale School of Medicine, and it was published earlier this year in 2024. But they were looking at exactly that, just like, okay, let's do the science. Same faces, so it would be my face on a screen, my face in person. What's going on in this person's brain? And they found, significantly different levels of activation in multiple different parts of the brain for seeing the same face, interacting with the same face, the same person in person versus on a screen, right? So we process social interactions differently, and it's like for business that doesn't maybe matter as much, like as long as you're still getting your social needs met elsewhere, right? But for therapy, which is a highly nuanced social process where you have to sort of be in the room, right? Like we're being in the room with someone, right?
Yeah.
If
there's a lot more emotions involved.
Exactly. If you're having social, behavioral, emotional problems, then you need to be in the context where you're getting the full experience of another social, emotional being being there with you, right? And to be fair, like telehealth has its things, like we were just saying, like shades of gray, like for people who have really significant PTSD where it's hard for them to feel safe around other people, right? That's a great tool, right? They can be safe in their own homes and they don't have to worry about, maybe something happened and they don't feel safe, right? So it's good for that. People who have severe social anxiety and agoraphobia, right? So agoraphobia is like sort of fear of escape, which translates oftentimes into fear of public places, because if I'm not somewhere where I can escape, right, to safety, then I don't go out, right? So agoraphobia is like kind of being when your world shrinks down, right, to only the safest places, like your apartment, let's say, right? Yeah. So for people like that, it's inevitably to start, right? But then again, you get into this, there's this idea with anxiety called sort of safety behaviors, right? So it's good to start, right? Because you want people to get therapy, but then the therapy is almost for people like that to come in person. That is the therapy, like overcoming your anxiety and coming into the office when you have social anxiety.
When you have that condition,
So that's the whole idea behind exposure therapy, right? Is that you need to face the thing that gives you anxiety and that makes you stronger, right? So exposure therapy was the basis of all the research that was being done at the lab I worked in at right? So they did the unified protocol for transdiagnostic treatment of emotional disorders in children and adolescents. It's a long name. UPC or the UPA works a little bit better. But those were the protocols that Dr. Erin Reich May came up with, that she adapted from the adult versions of those protocols, I think, which was, I may have this wrong, but Dr. Barlow, he's, I think, a Boston-based psychologist. So that was the research that was being done. It's very exposure-based, right? Face your anxiety in a safe way, right? So you do, so how exposure therapy usually works, especially for kids, right? You take, you make what you might call a fear ladder, right? So what are the things that you're afraid of, right? Rank them and how hard they are. Then we're going to start with the smallest one. And we're going to talk about what are you scared of? What are you scared might happen if we do this thing or if we face this thing, right? You help people process and say out loud what their actual fears are, what their actual worries are.
Starts with a discussion.
It's like a hypothesis, right?
Right.
Okay, you're scared of this thing. What's your hypothesis? What's your prediction about what's going to happen if we do this thing?
And then the next step on the ladder is...
Well, so then we would go do that thing, right? Okay, so then we go do that thing on the first thing after they talked about their predictions, right? So then we go do that thing, right? Help support them. Okay, that thing doesn't happen, right? That they predicted, right? Because they're just worrying, right? So they're like creating like the worst possible scenario. But then they get to experience that. They get to do the thing. They get to feel the anxiety. Then they face the thing. And then they realize, oh, like what I was worried about didn't happen, right? And then you go back, you process that with them, right? And help them kind of see it. And then you work up to the next thing that they're afraid of, right? And you kind of go through that protocol until you help them face the thing that's at the top.
Right.
Right.
That's awesome. Really interesting stuff. I love the idea of like opportunity costs, and of course with telehealth, it seems like
Yeah.
there's a ton, but it also helps in some ways too. So I think it just matters with context.
Oh,
of course.
Absolutely. And like, there's this, and I was in a exchange on X, and one of the things they said was like, well, one thing that's commonly brought up is it's better than nothing.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, it's better than nothing. Sure. I'm not disagreeing with that, but it comes at the cost of when someone's like, well, I'll just fit it into my schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is just how I can fit it into my schedule. Instead of making time for it, then you're sort of placing this belief on it. Well, therapy or investing in my life or investing in this thing that these goals that I'm seeking out help to accomplish.
Yeah.
It's
not
not
like part of the routine.
It's not a
just like,
priority.
Yeah.
It's like it almost therapy becomes like lip service in a sense of like, well, I do see my therapist, and that gives it a bad rap. I think, telehealth is very, very important, but I think that there needs to be, sort of an informed way that we tell people that it's not preferred, and have like an actual real discussion about the pros and cons for each person specifically. Right. Instead of just being like, well, I can't like come at that time, so like let's just do it virtual. Right. Which is like sometimes how it goes. Right. It's like, okay, like I guess
everybody's unique. Excited to listen to your podcast to get more in depth about these topics. I want to ask you about reading. You had mentioned before you got into Malcolm Gladwell. You're an avid reader.
Yep.
So I want to start first. Top 3 books.
Oh man,
give them to me,
dude. Okay. One I just recently sent to our man Tony Flo as a birthday present in the mail. It's
shout out Tony.
It's Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. So for anybody who doesn't know, Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist prodigy. So he was like a psychiatrist by the time, I think he was like 20. I think he was even younger than that by the time he was a medical doctor and a psychiatrist. So he was young genius, psychiatrist working in Vienna circles. So at that time, Vienna was kind of coming out a little bit of its golden age, but still it was a very popular intellectual circle, had nothing but the brightest career prospects in front of him. And then the Holocaust happens, and Viktor Frankl was Jewish, and he survived Auschwitz, he survived Dachau because he was a doctor. But the book, Man's Search for Meaning, is the first half is about his accounts in the concentration camps and how in his journey and how it actually reshaped and like changed some of his notions about psychology from having that experience. And then the second half of the book is about him laying out his theory, right? And him talking about how it changed his philosophy on life, on people, on psychology, on meaning, right? Therefore, Man's Search for Meaning, right?
It's on my list.
Yeah, it's a banger, dude, for sure.
2 more.
Yeah.
They don't have to be in order. Just
2
I know.
More that was the first one that came to mind.
2 more that come to mind.
2 more that come to mind. Okay. The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided on Politics and Religion. Jonathan.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting one, especially right now to read.
Jonathan Haidt, and that's why I'm bringing it up. I read this book in 2020. I sought it out. I think it was, if I have it right, I think it was published in like the early 2010s. I'm not sure when it was published, but Jonathan Haidt, who you have his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, over there.
Okay, it's by him?
Same psychologist.
Okay.
He also wrote The Anxious Generation, how social media and technology is creating an epidemic of mental illness in children. Right?
I know you do a lot of reading on that.
I butchered that tagline, but same psychologist. That's a book I want to talk about too, but that's not in my top. The reason I'm bringing this book up is this particular psychologist. He's an NYU-based psychologist, actually, in the Stern School of Business at NYU.
I think I remember that.
He's awesome, but he wrote this book called The Righteous Mind. And it's basically the culmination of his decades-long investigation into moral psychology, right? So he was super interested in, like, how did we develop a moral brain, right? Where does it come from? It's almost a la The Selfish Gene. You were just reading that, right? Richard Dawkins.
It's a great book.
It's kind of in the same sort of what you might say the same domain, although I'm sure Richard Dawkins comes at it a little bit more, biologically.
Definitely biologic perspective.
Yeah, he's more of strictly evolution.
Yes.
But in The Righteous Mind, it's still evolutionary psychology, but I think it's more into the psychology than the biology. But it's his decades-long investigation into moral psychology, and he comes up and outlines, it's part story, part his story, part explaining and shaping how his theory, moral foundations theory, came about. So moral foundations theory is about that we have these, what he calls moral taste buds, right? Mm-hmm. And we have like 6 or 7 of them. Mm. And these are all based on evolutionary issues, mm-hmm. right? So, and then they transfer onto moral issues. Hmm. So one thing that's really interesting about it, so one of these, as an example, is sanctity/degradation, right? So each mm-hmm. one kind of has 2 sides. So conservatives are typically higher in sanctity/degradation than liberals, right? On average. What does that actually mean in practice, right? So there's another psychologist who came up with this idea of parasite stress theory, and I'll show you why this is important coming back to this point, which is the more pathogens that there are in a given state or country predicts how conservative that state or country is. And that seems really weird, right? Well, that actually correlates with if you have a more sensitive disgust response. So if you smell bad, rotten food mm-hmm. and you throw up, mm-hmm. you're more likely to be conservative. And I'll get into why
that's
this is.
Such a random correlation.
There's a really interesting study he talks about in the book where they had undergrads come in, right? Before a week before they come in the lab, they sent them a political attitudes test, right? And however they scored, right? So they had a baseline. Mm-hmm. Then they brought them into the lab to retest them in person. But what they didn't know is while they were in the waiting room, they had someone who's in on the experiment come in and they threw a stink bomb in the trash, like with their lunch. Like they threw out their lunch and threw out like a stink bomb into the trash in the waiting room where all of the participants are, mm-hmm. triggering that disgust response, mm-hmm. right? Minute or 2 later, after that happens, they pull them into the room and test them. Everyone left, right, center scored more conservative after their disgust response was triggered than the week before.
So what does that say about their ethical being or their...
Nothing. Nothing about their ethical being.
Okay. What does that say? What's the...
Right. So the point is it further shows that there's biological bases for how we respond emotionally to different moral issues. Right. So the point is conservatives are more likely to be afraid of pathogens, right? So they're more afraid of...
But they rather not take a vaccine.
Right, well, so we can get into... We can get into...
Let's not get too far into politics. I don't want to do that.
No, I know. I'm trying to stick to the psychology of it. So the other thing, right, with it going back, right, is you can pivot that onto social problems, right? Mm-hmm. So sort of immigration as social pathogens, right? So that's why conservatives are more likely to be afraid of immigration, right? Mm-hmm. Because, these are more people without our culture who are coming into the country, right? Mm-hmm. They see that as a threat. They're more threat sensitive, mm-hmm. right? That's just one of them, right? There's like care harm, mm-hmm. right? Which is the evolutionary adaptation that we have to take care of babies and to take care of each other, right? So we want to be compassionate towards others. We want to have empathy. We want other people in our tribe to survive, right? Kin selection, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that, and people who tend to be liberal tend to not just score higher on the care harm, but mm-hmm. they put more weight on it mm-hmm. than the other sort mm-hmm. of moral taste buds. Mm-hmm. But going back to the sort of the disgust thing, right? The whole point was just to show that we have these moral psychology and our emotions about moral issues are tied to things that are deeper than we think they are, mm-hmm. right? And our best research right now, it shows that, surprise, surprise, genetics are about 50% predict your political attitudes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So with most things,
I wonder what genes they're looking at.
Yeah.
To like.
Well, it's not about genes. Usually, how they do those kind of studies is identical twins.
Okay.
Right. And
right.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Then you got the same person, right?
Yeah. So it's usually that, and they try and control for things the best they can. People will always take issues with those sorts of. How do you break apart? How do you control for things, and yada yada. But
that is super interesting.
Yeah, anyone who has problems with genetics needs to go read The Blank Slate by Steven Pinker.
Is this the third one?
That's not the third one.
Okay,
It's not the third one.
Where's the third one?
Okay,
give us the third one.
Sorry. Okay,
quickly.
let's go back to the third one. Okay.
And just for the sake, I want to make sure this recording doesn't get cut off. So
okay. All right. I'm trying here. I'm like going through. I'm like envisioning my bookcase in my head. I'm trying to think of ones that I've read multiple times, because those are probably the ones that really mean the most to me.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you really got to think about this. Huh?
I know.
And he's probably read hundreds and hundreds of books.
Because I know I'm going to say one and then wish that I said another one. I'll say Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky.
Okay.
And the reason I'll say that is because it's, first of all, it's a fiction book, and the first two I said were nonfiction. But the reason I picked that one was because it was the first book that I read that I really challenged myself to read sort of like what would be considered a literary classic from a different era, right? So he wrote in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. He's a Russian author. Mm-hmm. For whatever it's worth, the Easton Press, he's written 4 out of the 100 greatest books ever written. The Crime and Punishment being one of them.
Wow.
So he's a really profound author. He has a really interesting life.
And what's the quick breakdown on this one?
So it's very psychological. It is about a sort of a very poor man, Raskolnikov, in Russia, mm-hmm. and he's at the bottom of the barrel of society. And it's about his sort of slow pull into madness and crime, and how he rationalizes his crime, and then eventually how that rationalization breaks down, and how how his psychology changes after he starts committing crimes. And so it's very psychological, because it's very from his perspective of before like leading up to mm-hmm. him like breaking, right? Mm-hmm. Him breaking, and then the aftermath of that psychologically for him, mm-hmm. right? And so it's very interesting to kind of see how literary minds like depicted psychology, and it's like mixed with philosophy about life before there was the real sort of psychological awakening, like before Freud and before Jung, and before like the psychoanalysis and the first sort of big schools of psychology mm-hmm. came about. William James, shout out to. But yeah, so that's
awesome.
That's my third one.
I got 3 new books to read. I'm excited. I'll keep you posted. I have to ask, for anyone who's interested in becoming a better reader, what are some strategies that help you get through books? What's your typical approach for, from purchasing to like, and then again, I know you reread a lot of books. So what are some key takeaways for reading?
First, own your taste.
Okay.
You can't read,
I like that.
You can't read stuff you don't want to read. So if you want to read like the cheesiest, rom-com novels in the world, and that's the thing you love more than anything,
okay,
read every single one in the world, and don't let anybody don't let anybody tell you that you shouldn't.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's a great takeaway.
That's one. Own your taste.
Okay.
Certainly go outside your comfort zone a little bit here and there, but read what you want to read. That's number one.
Going out of your comfort zone will definitely help you get better.
Yeah, definitely help you get better. And when you go outside your comfort zone, like for example with Crime and Punishment, when I read that, it was like the first time I read not only that, but read like a book that was by an author who the book was not originally written in English. Like it was originally written in Russian. So it's translated, right? So it has a very, you could tell, right? Like, despite the best translations, right? And people trying to like come up with all these different translations of the story, it doesn't read like, because it's Russian. So it doesn't read in English.
It doesn't read the same.
It doesn't read the same. But The other things I would say is when you're doing that, when you're going outside your comfort zone, give yourself permission, like to just skim through stuff that doesn't make sense. Give yourself permission to like, even skip a chapter, right? Like you get something out of it. Just, you don't have to absorb the whole book. You're not going to absorb the whole book anyway. And especially if you're straining to like try and soak in every word, then you're definitely not going to take anything from it.
Right.
So skim through it, find the parts that are interesting to you. Key in on those parts. You can return to the book later if you need it, if you want another go around, if you want to try again.
That's another great one.
Yeah. And that goes along with kind of pre-reading, right? So get the format and like understand the way the book
table
is.
of contents.
Yeah. Understand the way that the book is laid out. Try and get a feel for what the author is trying to say. If it's a nonfiction book, like what is their premise? What's their thesis? Before you dive in, so you understand how everything connects to the major points. Aside from that, like, just own your taste, and give yourself the permission to read each book differently, because no two books are the same. And you're not going to like what you take from each book is going to be different. So don't feel like you have to approach each book the same way, because you certainly don't.
Awesome. Those are great takeaways. Thank you for sharing those.
Happy to.
Awesome. So I have to ask, this is a question I ask everybody.
Yep.
For everybody who is watching, I think you understand now why we call him Robo. Just brilliant, lots of information. I got to ask you, Better Road Podcast, what's one thing that makes your life better or improves the quality of your life?
What's one thing that makes my life better or improves the quality of my life?
Doesn't have to be like improvement-wise, could just be like, something you enjoy.
Sure. I think gratitude. I think I've noticed that the more I set with an intention that I'm grateful for certain things in my life, that like when I approach my day is better.
Okay.
So
do you keep a gratitude journal? Does that help you?
No. This is something that started in the last couple of weeks for me. I noticed I was getting a little burnt out. I was getting a little bogged down. And what changed for me was I realized like the attitude that I'm bringing to my day-to-day life when I get stuck in sort of giving of myself, because therapy is a very giving career. Like I'm really putting myself in a position to give to others. Yeah. And I love that. And that's why I pursued it.
That's amazing.
But when you flip it on its head and you start being like, I have to give.
Yeah.
Right. Then it changes everything.
Yeah.
Then you're going against the grain instead of with the grain. So just coming back, setting my intention. I'm so grateful to give.
I get to give.
I'm so grateful that I'm in a position to give.
Yeah.
And like what a beautiful thing to help other people. And that has helped me so much more again.
That's a great way to reframe it. I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anyone looking to connect with you, listen to your podcast coming out.
Sure.
Best ways to do so?
Yep. So give me a follow at Connor J. Mears on X. My boy at Vince Botto Jr. on X. I think he's on Instagram too. We have a YouTube channel that we're going to be uploading our first episode to later this week. It's the Connecting and Commotion podcast. And you can find that Connecting and Commotion channel on YouTube.
Connecting and Commotion, tap in. That's going to be in the description of this video. So go ahead, give Connor a subscribe, follow him on X. Also, I just have to mention, I have to bring this up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
Connor is very viral on TikTok for his dance moves. I got to check actually, because I have the video saved. I got to see how many views we're at.
Oh man,
I got to see how many
I
views
didn't
we're
even think
at.
this was gonna come up, but
It had to. Let's see where we're at.
I haven't seen in a while.
What do you think the prediction is? Like how
last I saw was approaching 1 million. I don't know.
I think you broke it. I think
I broke it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Connor came into our good friend Paul's wedding with the intention of really
busting down
and like everyone, like noticing Connor, of course, and he didn't realize that he would. Yeah, you're at 1.1 million views.
Nice, cool.
So
man. Pretty funny.
Pretty fly.
If there's anything I'm gonna go viral for, it's my lack of inhibition on the dance floor.
No. He was breaking it down. He killed it.
What I will say is, Tony was on here, so Tony. I said to Tony that my goal was for people at the end of the night to say, "Who was that guy?" Yeah. And I think I accomplished that goal. I think I lit it up for my boy Paul, and Paul Paul and his wife are amazing people. They're super special. And so I'm happy that I could bring that energy for them, because if there's anyone who deserves to be celebrated with those kinds of elite moves, it's those two.
Yes, absolutely. Shout out, Paul. We love you very much. All right. Before we go, I have to ask, any other people that you know or we might know that you think should hop on this podcast?
Well, have you had Paul on?
I'd love to have Paul on.
Yeah, let's go.
I'd love to have Paul on.
Sir Paul.
Sir Paul, we'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please subscribe to the channel for more videos, and peace.
Thanks for watching, guys.